Welcome to my library, dear guest. My name is Ko, and I will be your storyteller. Today we will read a story that many of you may have already heard about. A story about one problem player and his deeds documented by a very bitter and in my humble opinion, more problematic author in 7 parts. I present to you the Ross Saga. This will be a long one, and I will summarize my thoughts on it at the very end. Until then, simply lean back, grab a hot chocolate, draw, write, or whatever you will as I read to you this tale. I hope you enjoy. Story number 1. Player kills Ghostbusters RPG in the first session. By the author, Castle Bravo XVC. Ross was terrible. Just seriously the worst. I was only roommates with him because I felt sorry for him at the time. I spent the next 6 years feeling sorry for myself. When I had, in effect, adopted him into my social circle, my friends tolerated him for my sake. He was a terrible role player. The list of examples is endless, and quoting some infamous incidents years later is still shorthand amongst my friends for don't be dumb. I had a friend, Eric, that lived in the same building as us, and in between the irregular D&D games the entire group played, I figured the 3 of us could do something light. Enter the Ghostbusters RPG. I love RPG. I love schmarmy, funny games when appropriate. I love Ghostbusters. I'm more excited for this than I have been for anything in a long time. I walk the 2 players, Ross and Eric, through the basics of the game and character creation. I only set 2 expectations. I'd like them to play fictionalized Mary Sue versions of themselves, buying into the franchise in our home city, and that oftentimes creative, humorous thinking is key. Everything else we could figure out as we go, because this is supposed to be a light, fluffy distraction between our regular game. Eric decides he's an architect, a long-time passion of his. For his backstory, he encountered a ghost or curse on a dig, and later bought into the franchise. Great. Simple, and it hangs together easily. Ross is making a big tech character. He fancied himself quite the technocrat. I suggested he could have answered a want ad to manage the equipment and containment system. What I thought would be a simple but very Ghostbusters-ish backstory. You would have thought I'd just told him I'd kicked his cat off the balcony. He was pissed. I'd never actually seen someone be sullen before. Until my death, when I mentally define sullen, I will eternally think back to that moment. Ross starts complaining about why he can't make his own backstory. Why'd Eric get to make his own backstory? Jeez, okay. Ross wasn't usually one to have much of a plan, but I figured he'd put a bunch of thought into his character. My bad. Please, what did you have in mind? Despite this happening over 10 years ago, the words he said that weekend afternoon are seared into my brain. Well, I figure I'm a hacker, and I was on the web, hacking, and, I found something. My years knowing Ross had taught me to keep my expectations low. But wow. I gently, oh so gently, asked how that led him to becoming a Ghostbuster with Eric. I would have accepted literally anything. I just wanted to go, but having something simple to play off of would be nice. Maybe he encountered a techno demon. Or he found out that someone had applied for a GB license in the city and sought them out. Maybe him and Eric were friends in-game already. Maybe anything. I don't know, was all I got. So I gently, oh so freaking gently, offered a series of suggestions, much as the ones above, to which Ross replied, "Fine, whatever, I answered an ad then." Cool. Great start. They get a call. The police are reaching out to them because there's what they suspect to be a haunted taxi running rampant through a chic outdoor market area. Let's roll. Sure enough, there is a rampaging taxicab barricaded into an outdoor market by the police. They try to proton pack it. Eric hits, having made a well-rounded character. Ross misses, having put only the minimum points into his proton pack. The cab driver and the cops start screaming at them for damaging private and public property. Eric figures pretty quickly that shooting the taxi probably isn't what they should do. He starts talking to the cops, and then the taxi driver, and then the passenger in turn. During and between the conversations, I keep asking Ross what he's doing. Each and every time, I get the same response. He sits there, deep in thought. He gets this pissy look on his face. Says he can't think of anything else to do. Shoots his proton pack at the cab. Misses, and gets yelled at by the cops. Despite Eric in character pleading with him to try something else, he keeps doing it. Despite the police pleading with him, same thing. Despite the cab driver pleading, same thing. Despite Eric and me out of character pleading, same goddamn thing. During all of this, Eric figures out that the passenger was smuggling a statue that apparently houses a demon. And because it was already extremely clear to him not to just shoot at the goddamn thing, he attempts to jump into the rampaging taxi. He doesn't get it on the first few chances, but he eventually jumps through the window and into the front seat. All the while, Ross is repeating the same process, getting more and more angry and having less and less fun as time goes on. Eric eventually turns off the taxi's meter, exorcising the demon from the car. A chuckle-worthy solution for what should have been a quick chuckle-worthy session. I hand them the bill. They would have been paid $5,000 for taking care of the taxi. But with all the property damage, they're in the red and will be taken to court if they don't pay. This is an actual mechanic of the RPG. Eric had a blast. Ross was almost in tears, he was so angry. His feedback was less than constructive, amounting to whining. He has no intention of playing again. This wasn't the worst of that player. Honestly, there's too many examples for a single post. When I tell stories of Ross, both from D&D and IRL, I honestly think people don't believe me. Because no one could be as frustratingly stupid as he. But no, I couldn't make up Ross if I tried. This wasn't his worst. It was just a good example of who he was and how he ruined something I was excited about. Story number 2. GM runs 2 different Star Wars adventures. Fails to prepare literally anything. Ross loved Star Wars. Ross had played RPGs before I met him. You'd figure Ross could run a Star Wars campaign. You'd think. You'd be wrong. I first met Ross at a job and invited him to a D&D game I was joining. Back before I realized how insufferable he could be. I look back on those days, remember myself, and just think, you poor, ignorant bastard. So, Ross plays D&D with us. And he's not great. He played RPGs before, but he's quiet and doesn't really RP. Now, well, people are good at different things, and it sometimes takes people to come out of their shell. The game itself was okay, and we all had fun enough. Actually, one incident stands out as one of my best D&D memories ever. The phrase invisible pig has become shorthand for overthinking any plan way too much. Well enough that when Ross says he'd like to run a Star Wars game, that me and another guy, Fritz, agree. Ross had us get together a couple of weeks later at Fritz's house. I made some type of tech guy, and I can't remember what Fritz made. It was 15 years ago, sue me. Ross has given us no indication what the game will be like, so I have no expectations. And even those couldn't be met. We are rebel troopers being landed in the middle of a battle. Okay, going for gold. Our objective is to get to a bunker. There is no combat, no RP. The only skill check is when I ask if I can tap into Imperial frequencies. We are getting close to the bunker when suddenly a squad of stormtroopers surround us. Oh, I see. We're going to be captured, then we'll probably have to escape. Maybe we'll meet someone and have to free them or get a message out. I see where this is going, and I like it. Except that's not where it was going. Suddenly, a Jedi jumps out of the bushes, and she immediately kills all the stormtroopers with a pink lightsaber that Ross made a great effort to draw our attention to. Okay. And then, with this Jedi, who is the only thing in the game that has gotten any type of description so far, standing before us atop a pile of dead stormtroopers without suffering a single hit, holding out her pink lightsaber before her, seriously, he kept emphasizing it, an electronic voice rings out around us. Simulation complete. And we're in a holodeck. Fritz and myself, at some point from getting onto our shuttle to being dropped off on the planet, had entered a holodeck. This was all apparently a test to see if we qualified for a special mission under the Jedi. Okay. Still don't know how we passed a test when all we did was walk into an ambush and get saved. But I'm not Rebel Command. Listen, I'm a Star Wars and a Star Trek fan, so I know what belongs in each and what doesn't. And I'm willing to forego any fandom expectation in the name of fun. Holodecks and new Jedi in the middle of the original trilogy? Okay, we're in an alternate universe. I have no problem accepting that. But there's going to be fun, right? Right? Well, that was the session, turns out. 1 hour of gameplay in its entirety. Okay, guess this was kind of a session 0 or something. What can we expect from the next adventure? Glad you asked, because Ross definitely shared. The game, as he saw it, would be a series of missions and adventures that his character, yes, not an NPC, his personal character, would go on, and we would support. He made special care to explain that he'd played this character for a long time, and has super high stats, a special lightsaber, and an X-Wing completely plated in chrome. Because all of that mattered, apparently. Benefit of the doubt still given. Maybe this will be like a deconstruction of the RPG genre. Like, maybe we'll be a shining spotlight on support roles, and while the hero goes on adventures, we get to follow the B-team do the stuff that needs to be done for them to complete their mission? I'd be down for that. So I asked. Nope. Ross plans for us to literally follow his Jedi around, watching her do stuff and being saved by her. I politely tell Ross that I'm worried that the game would just be us following a Mary Sue around to see how cool they are. Ross doesn't know what a Mary Sue is, so I explain. and as I do, I see him deflate. Like, I thought that was a turn of phrase until I saw Ross literally do it in front of me. That was exactly what he had planned. When I suggested that maybe a game where we did our own missions and that his character kind of popped in and out might be more fun and give us more to do, he just sadly said he'd think about it. There was no session 2. That was the day I learned to set my expectations a bit lower for us than regular humans. But that was only the first time he ran a Star Wars adventure, and I use that word as sarcastically as it can be used. A couple of years later, we're roommates. He wasn't all bad. First, there is a convention coming up at a hotel that a friend, Eric, had run a one-shot at the year before, and Ross wants to run a Star Wars session. Now, when he said those words, I had, a Vietnam-style flashback. Only with disappointment instead of burning villages. So I cautiously feel him out and make sure that he'll A. have enough material to last a few hours, and B. won't have us follow a Mary Sue. No problem, he assures me. It'll be awesome. So we all gave him the benefit of the doubt. Really, this was our fault at this point. Ross has months to prepare. He keeps giving us updates that he's got something really cool planned. Ross is the kind of person who could recite the entire expanded universe off by heart, so I figured he could pull a few ideas together and make a nice evening of it. The convention comes. A few of the regular circle and a random stranger get together to play Ross's Star Wars game. What we each played or who was who would be completely unimportant, even if I could remember it. Which I can't. I suspect my mind erased most of the experience from my brain in self-defense of my sanity. I can only remember snippets, like a half-remembered episode of some children's show I hadn't seen since my youth. The plot, in its entirety, involves us landing on a planet, walking over to an abandoned temple, and being sucked through a Stargate. Like Stargate. From Stargate. We landed, walked over to the temple. We entered the temple. We saw a Stargate. It activated it. We all got sucked in. And that was it. Beginning, middle, and end. Fin. Where do we come out, you might ask? That's a great question. We thought it was a great question too, which is why we asked it. I haven't figured that part out yet, Ross replied. Months. He had months to prepare that. Total playtime amounted to 30 minutes, 20 of which was interpersonal RP before we landed on the planet. I am still incredulous to the fact that this was what he had accomplished in months. We hadn't asked him to run it. We had checked in with him multiple times. He seemed genuinely enthused. For months. And this was all we got. The convention was a weekend long. No one had brought anything else to play, and no one had anything prepared. We spent a lot of our downtime at the convention just kind of bumming around, playing Game Boy. Russ never again GM'd anything to my knowledge. He may have offered, I can't remember. No one ever took him up on an offer, that's for sure. And I wish this was the last time Ross had so completely disappointed us during an RPG game. But we hadn't really learned our lesson yet. Story number 3. Player has a tantrum he wasn't Asian after reincarnation. Before we get in any further, I need to clarify something. Ross is white. Ross is painfully white. I'm, really white. But compared to Ross, I may as well have been a mix of every ethnicity that wasn't white. Ross was the source from which the concept of Caucasian spread from. Like Hutterite off the farm kind of white. All right, and all white. Now that that's been cleared up, we can continue. So, I had been DMing a 2nd edition campaign for a couple years. I'm an old school mindset of hard battles and slow progression. So when I say my group was mid-level, I need to clarify that this was a hell of an accomplishment. There hadn't been a PC death in a long time, and so my group had become pretty confident in their abilities. The group consisted of a human bandit, an elven cleric, who I've incorporated into my current world's lore as it had some of the best and most epic character development I've ever been privy to, a human mage, a human bard, a human samurai played by Eric, a friend mentioned in another game, and Ross's human ninja. The halfling might have been a member of the group by that point, I can't remember. Now, following their encounter with destroying an evil dragon's soul, that is definitely an uncomfortable Ross story I will get to some other time, the group was traveling through some frigid mountains, trying to find a pass to a southern homeland of 2 of the PCs, the samurai and the ninja. They eventually come across a small community of humans in the midst of funeral preparations. A young girl in their village recently passed. Through conversation, the village elders reveal that they guard a sacred tomb that holds great power and evil in turn. Occasionally, adventurers enter the tomb, but none leave. They are tasked to ensure no evil escapes. All too tempting, the group enters. Which is all well and good, as the tomb contained my most elaborate dungeon I've ever crafted. A multi-level puzzle and monster-filled labyrinth that featured a number of magic items to prepare them facing final, deadly challenge. And a way to pass through the mountains, but that was beside the point. The group enters, and they struggle with a few puzzles while having some genuinely tough encounters. Sven the Lore Master is a feather I'm particularly proud to have in my cap, even if it led to the mage accidentally becoming an Ifrit, which seriously put a monkey wrench into my plans. But fair's fair. Through the dungeon, they had found 2 magical items designed to protect them against their final encounter. One was a ring that prevented life-draining attacks, and the other was some type of item that protected against cold-based attacks. This was over 10 years ago. You can't expect me to remember every detail. I mean, come on, cut me some slack. The 2 frontline PCs, the bandit and the samurai, each take 1. The bandit takes the ring of life-draining protection, and the samurai takes the cold thing. Just gonna call it a ring, though. I'm pretty sure it wasn't a ring. They get to the final chamber in the dungeon and encounter a cryo-hydra and a wraith. Now, anyone who has played old-school D&D knows there are few ways to mess up an adventuring party than to throw a wraith at them. Every hit, without save, permanently drained experience levels. I'd encountered one as a PC myself and went from level 9 to 3. This can be devastating. I figured that a second threat to divert their attention, but a magic item to protect a primary target would make for a nice balance for a challenge. It would have been a nice balance. It would have. If only the PCs had have thought things through for even a moment. The bandit, who is protected against life-draining attacks, made a straight line for the cryo-hydra. The samurai, protected against cold attacks, then went for the wraith. My my friends were sometimes not burdened with an overabundance of sense. So, the fight is a little rougher than expected. The samurai and the ninja die. But I am not a cruel DM. I taketh with one hand and giveth with another. In the loot, they find 2 scrolls, one of resurrection and one of reincarnation. To be as fair as they possibly can be, the party randomly chooses who gets what. The samurai gets resurrected. Ross's ninja gets reincarnated. To avoid him being reincarnated as a badger, I just let him know he will be reincarnated into the body of the nearest humanoid, which just so happens to be the body of the young Viking girl outside. Which is perfect because he was playing a young girl to begin with. I didn't plan it, but it worked out, right? Now this is where the horror begins. As Sophia might say, picture it. Sicily, 1922. Ross was the oldest amongst us in the group. The most mature, if you will. We wouldn't, but you might. A 30-year-old man sitting there on the couch, surrounded by friends, on the verge of tears, because his character is being reincarnated as something other than a teeny, tiny Japanese girl. Now, at that time in my life, I had never expected that there would be a point I would need to console someone 5 years my elder because they could no longer pretend to be a Japanese girl. The Scandinavian features of his ninja's new body were completely unacceptable. And we all just sat there, uncomfortable. So I decided to maybe show him a silver lining. Early in the dungeon, there had been carvings indicating that the dungeon was protected by bears. The reason for that is that the human clan were actually werebears. Congratulations, you're now a werebear, Ross, with all the benefits that come from it. Cool bear form, immunity to non-magical attacks, etc. It mattered not. If Ross couldn't pretend to be a Japanese girl, then what point did D&D even have? So we ended the session there. It seemed like a natural way to end the day. Everyone kind of shuffled out of Ross's and mine apartment. And for the next few days, Ross indicated that he didn't think he'd play anymore, as the game was no longer fun for him. We played, and still do, minus Ross, bi-weekly. So, about a week before the next session, I've prepared everyone that Ross might not be joining us further. To which everyone was as disappointed as I'm sure you'd expect them to be. But then, the hypotheticals start coming. Ross starts asking a few questions here and there over a few days. Thinking he's being cagey or clever. Are there magic items that let us look like someone else? Are those effects permanent or temporary? Are there any items that would change his appearance permanently if it wasn't meant to disguise him as someone specifically? If there isn't such an item, could one hypothetically be commissioned for enough gold? Etc., etc., etc. I saw where this was going long before Ross shared his cleverly laid plans, and was disappointed all the while. Ross isn't exactly a master of deception. Yes, Ross talked himself out of quitting D&D because he now had a new mission in life for his currently Scandinavian ninja. As the gods as his witness, he would be Japanese again. Cool, that's the most important thing, I guess. With a single-minded determination I may have admired had the goal been anything other than what it was, Ross set out to make his ninja Japanese again. And thus, using all wealth his character had accumulated over a not insubstantial career, Ross commissioned a magic ring when they reached a major settlement. The cost was substantial, as arcane magic was rare outside of a few areas. And thus did masters of arcane secrets and smiths trained in lost arts work together to craft a powerful new magic item, previously unseen in the world. The legendary Ring of Being Asian. Now, I've seen children open up Christmas gifts from Santa containing exactly what they'd asked for, and seen less joy in their faces than how Ross looked when he got that ring. The only thing I can liken it to is if someone had been an atheist their entire life, and then, upon hearing their first sermon, realized that their entire life until that moment had been absent a critical piece, but was now made whole. It still saddens me that the concept of spiritual ecstasy will forever conjure the image of a pudgy nerd crammed into a Neo jacket like an overstuffed sausage. But life leads us to all sorts of places we never thought we'd go. This isn't the most horrific of my Ross stories. Oh no, there's the equivalent of 2 TPKs still ahead. But it is the most Ross. Like, if I were to tell a D&D story to someone for the sole purpose of trying to define who Ross was, this would be it. A 30-year-old man mourning the loss of his Japaneseness. And I still can't believe I let this crap go on. I'm not mad with myself, just disappointed. I expected more from me. Story number 4. Player writes awkward love story between PCs. Ross fancied himself a writer. And to his credit, in the most technical sense, he was. He wrote. A lot. Man, did he write. Unfortunately, it's the kind of writing that I genuinely believe makes the world a poorer place by having it in it, regardless of anyone actually reading it or not. Prior to the love story he inflicted onto us, I'd already gotten a pretty good idea of his talents as a writer, being his roommate and also being too polite, at the time I've since been cured of that affliction, to tell him how absolutely terrible his writing was. Or still is, I don't know. I thankfully haven't had to read anything of his in a while, as that friendship was mercifully euthanized nearly 10 years ago. Before I actually tell you about the love story, I need to set some expectations for you. If there were any justice in this world, I'd have actual examples of his talents. But I don't. Actually, there might be justice in the world as I don't have examples. In either case, you'll just have to use your imagination a bit in order to appreciate these examples of Ross' writing capabilities. To start, Ross wrote some poetry. I say some in the sense that John Doe from Seven kept some journals. Ross filled book upon book with his poetry. He tried to convince me once that there were different poems. I remain unconvinced still, as the poetry he inflicted upon those poor, innocent pages all followed the exact same writing scheme, rhythm, and subject matter. As the poet once said, I can hold a note forever, but eventually that's just noise. It's the change that we're listening for. Well, Ross held the same note for near of his entire life, as far as I could tell. It ended up going a little something like this. I walk in shadows to hear you cry, forever waiting in the dirt to lie. Can't hold on any to my hope more. Shaken by love, it hurts to my core. I'm ashamed to say that as bad as that is, it's not nearly as bad as Ross's. In all honesty, it was kind of impressive what he had managed to accomplish. It was like the Room of poetry. He was the Tommy Wiseau of angsty elementary school rhyming. Imagine you're in grade 3, and you've just done a unit in English class about poetry and been assigned to write some. And that you've always wanted to hold hands with that one special person in class, but never worked up the courage to ask them. And also, you are absolutely convinced you're the only person in the history of the universe who has ever felt the emotional pain for the yearning of hand-holding. And so, you fill up hundreds of pages in this newfangled art form you've received a rough description of recently. But everything you write is the verbal equivalent of when an anime schoolgirl's eyes are shaking when on the verge of tears. That is what Ross wrote for poetry. Tomes of it. An encyclopedia, are you fucking with me, a nickel of it. One more example, because I really want to hammer this home for you. Ross, well, he was oblivious to tropes. His exposure to, life was limited. And so anytime he had an idea, it seemed to him that it was the first time someone had thought of it. For he had no frame of reference to compare it to. Which is why, when he told me he was writing a fantasy novel, I could almost predict verbatim his concept. And when I say novel, I mean he had about 40 pages of handwritten BS that I still have not forgiven his parents for vicariously inflicting upon me. Take 2 seconds. Think about the saddest, most tiredest fantasy tropes as a story concept that you can think of before reading ahead. Then compare what you thought of to what Ross thought of, and see how close you were. I trust you'll be pretty spot on. Got it? Okay. It went something like this. Thousands of years ago, there was a war. I seriously fucking hate myself for even remembering this crap. And in that time, there were 4 sets of armor forged to help combat the forces of darkness. They were imbued with ancient primal powers. One had the power of air, and one had the power of earth, and one had the, seriously fucking disgusted with myself, I can remember this, of water, and one had the power of fire. But there was a 5th set of armor imbued with an even greater power than all of the others. It carried the power of the greatest element. It had the power of love, but it was lost. Until now, when the Chosen One arose. But they didn't know they were the Chosen One. They were just a simple farmhand or whatever who, and on and on and on. Also, I'm not 100% on this, but I remember something about vampires in relation to the Huey Lewis armor. Okay, expectations set. You now know just how talented Ross was, yes? Okay, foreplay over, now we can get down to the RPG horror story. So, my party had just headed north while en route to the homeland of 2 players. Ross's ninja and another player's, Eric's samurai. For reasons, and encountered a Viking-like village under attack by ice giants. And after helping defend the town, with the help of a summoned fire elemental scroll that ended up seriously biting them in the ass due to a poorly chosen command, but that is a smug story for another subreddit. They learned that a dragon tooth in the village contained the soul of an evil dragon, that the giants wanted for dastardly and naughty reasons. And the only way to destroy the tooth was to take it to a portal leading to the elemental plane of fire in a far-off cave. And because they're heroes, they accept the quest. The suckers. Anywho, they eventually get to the cave, and they camp at the cave mouth as they had recently been roughed up by a Remorhaz, and wanted to ensure they faced the challenges of the fire cave at full strength. We had ended the session there, with plans to pick up the next session when they awoke. In the ensuing 2 weeks between sessions, Ross got to work. Now I need to pause here and clear something up. Ross was not interested in men. Ross had stuff going on, believe me. And as much as I shit on him here, there are some things I just won't share with the internet as they were generally told to me in confidence, and I'm not that much of an asshole. But Ross was not interested in men. Ross also viewed Eric specifically as nothing more than a good friend. Which is why, to this day, I am still dumbfounded as to why he wrote an epic, forbidden love story between his ninja girl and Eric's samurai dude. It wasn't pornographic. Well, not in the sense of parts going into other parts. It was emotionally pornographic in the way that Twilight is emotionally pornographic. It was the kind of tripe that a 10-year-old girl would get weak in the knees over when they had no concept of what romance actually was. Oh God, just writing about it leaves a sour taste in the sides of my tongue. I cannot begin to impress upon you, whoever you are, dear random internet person who is reading this, and how freaking uncomfortable this story was. The very thought of an over 30-year-old man writing a love story between his character and a friend's character feels weird. To me, granted, maybe I'm the minority. I don't suspect I am, but I could be. To give you a brief overview of what the 15 pages he proudly thrust towards me for eagerly awaited feedback, ninja and samurai are on watch, in the middle of a cold winter's night. Ninja starts crying. A concerned samurai asks what's wrong. Ninja confesses, in shame, about her fear of returning to her homeland, unsure if she had reclaimed her honor since leaving. Samurai, oh so tenderly, opens up his fur cloak to bring her into his arms and hold her close. Finding comfort in his arms, she nuzzles against his chest, feeling safe. She slowly gathers her composure, reassured in her own strength by his strength. And when the samurai says he has never met anyone as strong as her, she realizes she loves him. And they gaze into each other's eyes, or something, and can each feel the love that cannot be. For they have obligations to the world that forbid them from the comfort of expressing their mutual love. But they have tonight, at least. And so they sit there by the fire, comforting each other for as long as they can. I'm not a particularly wise man. I don't know the answers to the big questions. I don't know if there is a God, I don't know if there is a heaven. But I know for a fact that there is a hell because I saw it in those pages. Hang on, I don't want what I'm about to type to be hyperbole. Be right back in a couple minutes. There, I just went and brushed my teeth to get the taste of what the actual fuck out of my mouth. I can continue. And it wasn't just that it was terribly awkward. It was just so poorly written. The prose were simple, and there was no subtlety or subtext. It was also terribly, obviously awful in every complete sense of the word. So I told him it had some interesting parts, because I was just too much of a wimp to tell a friend their writing sucked and made me feel weird. When I asked him why he wrote, because I was positive no one had asked him to, he just said that he had a neat idea about the conversation his ninja would have with the samurai while camping. And they did have a conversation, to be fair, but it sure as hell wasn't that. And because I didn't take Ross's delusions and drown them in a tub like a sack full of unwanted kittens, he promptly showed the story to Eric. I've known Eric for almost 15 years. Not only is he one of my best friends, but he is one of the most forgiving people. And I can say that with the full confidence of someone who tested him beyond the reasonable expectations of friendship, because he forgave me for letting him read that story. Eric, to his credit, was pretty kind. In a way. He definitely encouraged Ross to take another pass at it. And he also warned everyone else about the story well in advance. And he didn't punch me in the goddamn mouth the next time he saw me. Like I said, he's a solid dude. I don't know if Ross ever edited his story before the next session. I do know he tried to offer it to the other players, and to their credit, they all declined. Even without Eric's warnings, I'm pretty sure the two of us physically screamed loud enough to everyone at the table to get the message across. Which is for the best. Because at least one person at the table tolerated Ross only insofar as they didn't actively try to attack Ross. But when presented with opportunities, our cleric Rod certainly didn't sugarcoat his opinions. And if Ross had have broken down into tears from some honest feedback, which I trust he would have, I sure as hell wasn't going to hold him to my chest throughout the night in order to comfort him. And still, this wasn't the worst of Ross. He continued to find new and amazing ways to exasperate everyone. Story number 5. Player won't stop climbing walls in the middle of combat. Gets angry when he keeps missing combat. One thing I will admit to being absolutely impressed with by Ross was his ability to stick to his convictions. When he sets his mind on something, he will fasten a kung fu grip so tight onto it that no amount of reality will buck him off. He will ride his desires and delusions into even hell itself. I know this to be true, as he has dragged me into it more than once. The first D&D character Ross ever played was a teeny tiny Japanese ninja girl. The second D&D character Ross ever played was a teeny tiny Japanese monk cat girl. We never did manage to remember the name he had given to either character, as they were just a mouthful of Japanese names that my brain mercifully refused to allow entry into my memory. It was just as well, because even though one was played in a 2nd edition Greyhawk-inspired homebrew, and the other was played in a 3rd edition Eberron-inspired homebrew, they were completely indiscernible from each other in any way, having the exact same personality as each other. Which is, to clarify, no personality. I would say they just had his personality, but that would be too generous a characterization of the sock puppets he ostensibly RP'd. No. Ross's personality began and ended with Japanese fetishization, Star Wars, The Matrix, and Jam and the Holograms. But that's at least something. The wiser among you, i.e. anyone that no longer eats paste, can differentiate between an interest and a personality, and may be thinking to themselves at this point, hey, those aren't personalities, those are just things someone likes. That'd be like saying someone's personality was pizza or the smell of freshly folded laundry. And I would say, you are absolutely correct, but shush, I'm trying to tell a story here, jeez. Being right isn't the point. Reality seldom found cause to impose itself into Ross's thought process. Ross found a way to make Jem and the holograms a personality. It was outrageous. Truly, truly outrageous. But despite his metaphysical accomplishment, most of those personality features couldn't easily transition to D&D. So, his characters' personalities were just hollowed-out versions of himself. Like someone had scooped out Ross's insides and made a frowny-faced jack-o'-lantern filled with melted cheese and sour cream instead of a birthday candle. We called them Kitty. Despite this, Ross fancied each character in turn quite the tactician. And while I wouldn't call him Sun Tzu, crawling kitty style has become a strategy synonymous with Ross's philosophy of combat, and will survive through the ages unmarked, as a testament to his incredible tactical genius. I had blown up a large island. It wasn't nearby, but parts of the island nation rained down along the continent, sowing destruction and discord. As part of a plot we never got around to resolving, and as a way of doing some interesting encounters, a treant with magically tainted anvil embedded in its trunk as an example, in random and interesting places. Submitted for the approval of the RPG Horror Stories Reddit, I call this story The Tale of the Dumbest Tactical Decision I've Been Privy. So imagine a church. Not a big one, like a small country village church. Now, explode that sucker. Imagine the roof blew off like it wasn't a Donald Duck cartoon. And that roof flew thousands of kilometers through the air before landing with a kerflunk in the middle of nowhere, partially embedded into the dirt at an angle. So, the front roof is jutting out, and then slowly sinks into the earth towards the back. It's about 15 feet high from roof to ceiling at the front of the hole, and about 2 feet high from ceiling to dirt at the back. Kind of like an apocalyptic lean-to. And imagine the denizens of said church are haunting their newly exploded dirt hut as guests. A nice little encounter. Should be straightforward. Well, my intrepid heroes, being the upstanding stalwart figures of a burgeoning legend, aren't gonna pass by a bunch of pissed-off undead assholes and risk them spreading evil and whatnot in their stead. Understandably, they decide to go stab them. Roll initiative. Ross goes somewhere in the middle. First few people walk into the church and start with the fisticuffs. Then along comes Ross. Never one to pass up an opportunity to ninja. Oh God, how did I wish there was an occasion he would. He seized his kung fu grip into a titillating idea, dragging us all into our own collective hell for the next few rounds of combat. With the careful measure of a grandmaster chess player, he announces the surefire strategy that will lead him to bingo. I don't play chess, but you shout out bingo when you get crowned, right? I'm going to climb the wall, he says in triumph. Ross, buddy, why? From a standing hop, you can brush your fingers against the roof. Why on earth would you need to climb the walls just as combat is started? I'm going to climb along the ceiling and drop down behind them so I can surprise them from the back. Okay, this was my fault, I figured. I hadn't explained the setup correctly. Ross isn't that dumb. I just did a bad job painting a mental picture. Let's back up a second and go over this one more time so that you can decide what you want to do. Ross listens to me, nods. I see he understands the words I am saying and that the order I put them in makes my intentions clear. Great. Ross, what are you going to do?
I'm going to climb along the ceiling and drop down behind them so I can surprise them from the back.
Okay. I'm looking around the table and seeing a lot of stupid glances being levied against an oblivious Ross. It's not just me, that's good. I was worried I was having a stroke for a second. But you know what? I get it. It's a weird setup, even describing something sometimes can't quite convey an idea accurately. So I literally draw him a goddamn picture. There, that. This is what you have to work with. That little stick figure there with the stinky lines over him, that's where the bad guys are. See this stick figure with a sword? That's where you guys are. See how much headspace there isn't the more you go in? Good. You understand now, yes? Alright. Now that we're all on the same page, Ross, please, tell me what you're doing and don't disappoint me. At this point, I feel like I've correctly set your expectations in who Ross is and who Ross isn't. I don't feel like I need to draw you a goddamn picture. I'm just going to leave a nice, long, blank space absent of words so that you can say it yourself. Okay, so we're all frustrated with him together. Despite what a catty bitch I've been to Ross in absentia here on subreddit, I tried not to be an asshole in real life. Despite my feelings, I didn't mean to be condescending, but I was when I asked him, "How the fuck do you think you'll sneak past them? The roof is 4 inches above their head back there." In hindsight, I think that was what actually caused him to tighten his grip. His stupid grip on that stupid idea. Like, no one's actually that idiotic, right? Like, regardless of how well I worded the description or drew a picture, no one could actually think that they could sneak over a group of guests in the middle of combat with only a 4-inch gap to squeeze through, right? It has to be that I offended him and he was going to show me what for. Like how a little kid will knock a birthday cake on the ground because if he doesn't get a corner piece, then no one gets any piece. A DM can't actually force someone to not be an idiot, so I accepted it. His teammates didn't. They took up to a futile call to reason. Whatever. One by one, the table just kind of learned to accept that this was going to be a thing. Here's the thing about ghasts. They fucking stink. You gotta make a save versus poison at a -2 or start uncontrollably retching. Ross couldn't have been more aware of this, as he had seen some of his comrades moments before they failed their throws. Undaunted, Ross goes to climb the wall, and the predictable happens. Well, now he's got to make his climbing checks at a penalty because retching and gagging isn't exactly conducive to parkour. But if you think that a little penalty would prompt Ross to reconsider his decisions, maybe I do need to draw you a picture after all. So he starts trying and failing to climb the wall to reach the ceiling. In the meantime, combat abounds. Eventually he gets up there, and then starts climbing upside down. And because I'm sick of arguing with him, I accept his reasoning that surely his ninja would have trained at climbing a freaking angled and arched ceiling upside down as part of her training, so I don't give him any further penalties. He's accomplished his goal, but it's about the time that he's hanging onto the ceiling, crawling along like an inverted turtle, at their shoulder height when he gets huffy as I tell him that one of the guests attacks. The gall of me. I mean, don't I know that he's climbing along the ceiling sneakily? He had asked if he could roll stealth, granted, and I let him roll. But roll or no, I explained that all the stealth in the world could not hide someone being at eye level with a person in 6 feet in front of them. And so, in a huff, he finally decides to just hop down and attack. The other thing about ghasts? They paralyze when they attack. And no, being upside down with all your limbs firmly planting you in place directly in front of the thing that wants to kill you does not make you harder to hit. Shocking, I know. So Ross gets paralyzed. Not that it mattered much, as combat ended the round after he dropped to the dirt like a paralyzed stone. At least he was involved in that combat. Yay! A couple of years later, and my friend Rod, who had been playing a cleric in that very topsy-turvy session, was DMing a game. I was playing one of my favorite PCs in my life of gaming, but that's a story for another subreddit. Ross is playing his cat monk now, and the party has just arrived at the brilliant conclusion that the old man wearing a black cloak who hired us to retrieve the book must, in fact, be an evil necromancer. The evidence was pretty conclusive. He was wearing a black cloak, and the paladin had detected something evil from me, and I was holding the book, so it had to be the book, I assured everyone. Because the NPC is smarter than us, he casts a wall of fire between us and him in the tavern we were to meet him, bisecting the main room in two. As we're rolling initiative, we're all trying to figure out how to get to the necromancer. Because that's what he totally was, I swear. Some are considering rounding outside of the building. The tougher of our numbers were considering leaping through the flame. Ross wins initiative.
I'm going to climb to the ceiling and crawl over the flames.
In that moment, everyone at the table that wasn't Ross collectively became one. For a moment, our minds found solace in the face of stupidity, and we melded into a hive mind. And it was as one that 5 open palms smacked 5 respective foreheads in disbelief. Not this shit again. Rod quickly assures Ross that the flames reach the ceiling. And still Ross intends to climb the wall. Someone points out that he can climb the stairs to the balcony that overlooks the room to reach the ceiling instead of climbing the wall. And still, Ross will climb. Of reason and pleading and incredulity, we levied at Ross. Unchanged was his conviction. But Ross's cat girl was a much lower level than his ninja girl. And so when he went to climb the wall, unlike those years before, he failed and kept right on failing. But failure wasn't an option for him, oh no. And so he kept trying. Something like 4 straight melee rounds. Spells and arrows are being fired through the wall in either direction. And in the periphery of the firefight, it was like in those cartoons where a cat climbs up a wall or cliff and then slides back down with lines of claw marks comically left in its wake. Except it was depressing. To our credit, one of our number eventually realized the wall of fire was illusionary and that the necromancer had escaped unscathed and undetected. Right around the same time that Ross finally reached the ceiling and discovered for himself that he could not, in fact, climb over the flames. I'm not going to go over every instance of Ross's failures to climb walls during combat. He never learned his lesson, but it didn't happen every single combat. But it happened enough. That's not the point of the story. They say insanity is repeating the same action and expecting a different result. Well, we kept letting Ross play with us and kept expecting him to not act like a total knob. No, The point of this story isn't to list every little quibble. The point is to express that some horror stories are your own goddamn fault. And yet, despite all that I've already shared, we still expected a different result. And to be fair, Ross had never TPK'd an entire campaign before. We'll get to those stories in a bit. Story number 6. Frustrated player strands everyone in the astral plane, effectively TPKing the party and ending the entire campaign. This is the big one. Of all the BS Ross put me through, and the list is substantial in both D&D and real life, this is the one that hurts the most. This was the moment he broke me as a DM and made me just throw my arms up in the air like I just didn't care. Because I didn't anymore. You can't win against Ross. He's a compact ball of oblivious misery that cannot be defeated. To oppose him is folly. All you can do is avoid him until he leaves the goddamn country. Who here has ever heard of Tales of the Outer Planes? If you want to take a minute to either act smugly because you have heard of it, or to quickly look it up so you can act smugly because you're pretending that you've heard about it, you go ahead. The House of TSR was founded on sprawling and insurmountable epic adventures once upon a time. A trend I'm glad to say Wizards has returned to with 5th edition. There was a bit of a dry spell for a while there, but we persevered. What once was great remains so. Tales of the Outer Planes is a boss of a module that's a hell of a lot of crazy fun. Or it would have been, save for Ross's best efforts. Maybe effort is the wrong word, because you sure made it seem effortless. You put whatever connotation you want onto those words, it's probably right. Ross was like that illusion where you see a bunny one way or an old lady the other. Is it a bunny or a lady? Was he an asshole or an idiot? Yes, the answer is yes. Anyone too enraptured with my stream of consciousness rantings, thinly disguised as a story to go look up Tales of the Outer Planes, here's a quick rundown of what it is. You know them thar outer planes? You gotta go there. Which ones, you asked? Yes, the answer is yes. Over the course of 12 or so levels, you'll end up taking a selfie in the elemental plane of water, rent an Airbnb in one of the 7 heavens, get a photo for the gram on Olympus, and take a walking tour through a couple layers of the abyss. Hashtag living your best PC life. All of this is facilitated by the World Serpent Inn, an interdimensional tavern with rooms that lead to all sorts of fun places. The ethereal plane, for example. Now, this was a 1st edition module, back in the not-to-be-fucked-with-lightly days, which worked for me. With a bit of tinkering, it would be a challenging adventure for my 2nd edition players. I'm a DM who isn't afraid to throw my players in the shit. To make it even more interesting, I decided to incorporate an article from Dragon Magazine issue 341 titled Alternate Primes. It was a series of adventures that could be tied together through the use of the World Serpent Inn. These adventures would take a party brave enough for the challenge through the different campaign settings of D&D, such as Al-Qadim, Dark Sun, and Ravenloft. I decided I would follow Tales of the Outer Planes as the main adventure, and Alternate Primes adventures as a way to mix it up on random occasions, as well as a means by which some extra experience can be earned so as to level match the Tales of the Outer Planes if they ever fell behind in the module. And also because the Ravenloft adventure featured my favorite D&D character of all time, Lord Soth. I'm all about that Soth. Soth features on the cover of that issue, and I have that exact image tattooed onto my arm because I likes me the soths. A lots of soths. I wasn't going to pass up an opportunity to put my players into Sithicus, is what I'm getting at. By the way, did you know a group of soths is known as a boardroom? A boardroom of soths. There's something new that you now know. You're welcome. This story is also aggravating to me after all these years for a number of reasons. Not only was the adventure epic and awesome, not only was I going to play around with my favorite dreadlord, kind of, not only was this all meant to be a light and breezy distraction from the main campaign, but it also included what I still consider as the best 1-2 combination of PCs I've ever had the privilege of DMing. Marcus Vaughn, the cleric, played by my friend Eric, and Alexander Mann, the action man, the fighter, played by another friend, Rod. They were great together. Marcus was the loyal friend, quiet and wise. Alex was as sharp as a brick, but a jovial and flippant comrade in arms. It was a good pairing. The three of us have made up a pretty consistent core playing group for most of my DMing career, but those two characters worked just beautifully together. There was also a mage played by Ross's friend, Max, who he RP'd as a young but eager to learn rookie. And then there was Ross. He played a paladin named Zelda. She had about as much personality as some old Venetian blinds. Sure, she could cast a shadow, but didn't really accomplish much else beyond that. And we always considered replacing her with something fancier, but never quite got around to that project. Oh my god, I'm actually quite impressed with how accurate that analogy ended up being. Now, every DM, like every parent, has favorites. Sure, you love all your children equally or whatever, but if there is a Sophie's Choice situation, you already know which one's going down. Every parent and every DM has had that conversation with themselves at one time or another. Ross. Ross was always the answer. Ross is always the answer. I plus fuck equals Ross. So for I, it's a trick question. I is an imaginary number that represents literally any fucking thing. The answer is always Ross. But that doesn't mean I conveyed that. I worked very hard, in fact, to avoid any semblance of my burgeoning hostility to the sound of his stupid voice. My normal playstyle as a DM was to throw a frisbee out there and trust someone will run to it and throw it back. I don't favor anyone. Fun is out there to be had, and all you have to do is get after it. Granted, some people are better than others at catching a frisbee. So when you see that short, chubby old man quietly moping off to the side, you eventually start sailing a few in that direction. You try not to make it obvious, but you're setting him up for an easy one. Ross didn't take to subtleties. Playing frisbee with Ross is like how Bart plays frisbee with Santa's little helper. You could hit him in the fucking face full force and his dumb expression wouldn't change. So, despite meeting gods and planar beings in the ethereal water, air, fire, and earth planes, as well as day trips to Earth and, I think this is 10 years ago, Sigil, Ross just ain't having fun. He could hang a lampshade on Zelda by doing something generically lawful good every now and then, or casting a healing spell or whatever, but she was never going to grow up and become a real girl. And because Ross wasn't deluded by words like ninja or catgirl with his character, he saw through his own shortcomings for once in his life and realized this was BS. And I gotta hand it to him, he was right to not be having fun. It was BS. Every session he just sat there and got frisbees thrown in his fucking face all day. I'd get pissed too after a while. So the group is a little over halfway done through the module. And if you're worried about spoilers from a 32-year-old D&D's module, well, I can't help you there, bud. Your priorities don't match reality. This is a you problem. So, they're halfway through Tales of the Outer Planes. Alex Mann has just gotten married to the drider who frequents the tavern. Well, it would be more accurate to say he sold himself into perpetual indentured servitude for the drider, but he was happy, so whatever. The cleric and the mage have gotten a nice little big brother, little brother thing going on. And Ross's paladin was some pissy blinds all tangled up in its own cord. When, all of a sudden, they are approached by a hooded figure in desperate need of some champions. You see, this person's master, an arcane sage, has had their soul trapped within the astral plane while searching for a legendary magical item known as the Book of Planes. They agreed to go rescue the sage, which is great because they are soon to find out that they're about to prevent a Githyanki invasion of the prime material plane by doing so. Or they would have, except they didn't count on the one thing they can never defeat: Ross's frustration and idiocy. A deadly combination from which there is no hope of salvation. So we're cruising along when, behold, they found the trail. The silver thread tethering the mage's body to the mage's soul has been found. All they need to do is find the mage's soul, stumble across the Githyanki, foil their invasion, gather the Book of Planes, and, following the thread, just row back to Spain like there is no mañana. Simple, right? Well, it's D&D, so there's always encounters. Don't act shocked, you know there's always encounters. And Ross has had enough of this. Being attacked by some demons, everyone rolls initiative. Eric does this, Max does that, Rod does something else. Ross, on his turn, thinks for a moment. You see, in his mind, he has reasoned that the demons are after the silver thread. The one that's tethering the mage's soul to her freaking body. And, he reasons still further, that if the demons want it, then it is the problem.
I cut the thread.
No DM ever wants to actively thwart a player's decision. If a player wants to be stupid, they can live with the consequences. The DM has the benefit of knowing what the consequences will be, and is more often happy to inflict them for their own perverse amusement. I speak from experience. You want to draw how many cards from the deck of many things? You got it, Sparky. Congratulations, the god of the undead fucking hates you now, so you might want to keep an eye out for that. But now and again, a decision will be considered that is so dumb that it threatens the fabric of the game. And in those times, we DMs will ask the question that carries more weight than anything else in all of Dungeons & Dragons could possibly carry. It's those 3 little words that will give even the most cavalier of adventurer pause to consider their life choices. Are you sure? It's the tone that sells it. The 3 other players, even Ross's shut-in of a friend that had no D&D experience prior to this game, takes note. Their heads swivel in unison to look back at Ross, who is suddenly very alone in the room. And to his credit, he pauses. He considers his actions. He weighs his options and re-examines the playing field.
Well, I can't think of anything else to do, so yeah, I cut the thread.
Too much credit, apparently. His teammates start assailing him with suggestions and cries of fear. That silver thread, the one that tethers the mage's soul to her body, might kill her if cut. And Ross's paladin is surely wise enough to maybe figure that out. And a paladin wouldn't knowingly kill someone if it's a possibility. Surely. Surely. But Ross is done. If ever he considered stabbing the demons that were attacking instead of murdering a helpless NPC, his frustration clouded his reasoning. And don't call him Shirley. With a grumpy expression, and I swear to God, an eye misty from frustration at his own impotence as a player, he just nods.
Yeah, I don't know what else to do, so I cut the thread.
For a second there, I was transported back to a moment years prior. A moment where I, Eric, and Ross sat together around that very same table, and I asked him what he wanted to do on his turn.
Fire my proton pack at the cab.
Then, as now, Ross had been given the opportunity to reconsider his decisions at the behest of his GM and teammate alike. And then, as now, Ross had weighed out and measured everything and doubled down on doing the wrong thing. And it became all so clear to me in that moment. I'd adopted Ross into my life when he was in a terrible situation. I'd let him live with me rent-free for over a month, moved all his shit from a literal dungeon into my place, and then later into the apartment I found for him. And then I became roommates with him for 5 straight years. All out of pity, because he reminded me of the socially retarded idiot I had once been when I was 15 years old, and hadn't gotten my shit together and done some growing up. Just a sad, inept sack of bewilderment. Except he was 5 years older than me. I had been convinced that all he needed was someone in his corner. Someone to give him the benefit of the doubt, and over time he'd get better. But there he was, years later, unchanged, doing the exact same thing for the exact same reason. Because he was a stupid asshole from the womb to the tomb. There were frustrations in our friendship, both big and small. But I honestly think that was the moment I realized I was done with him. Even though it was a genuinely innocuous thing, just a game of D&D, I finally accepted that Ross was going to continue festering as he was. I think it's because it was such an unimportant thing that I finally got that perspective. Like, the more important stuff had been prepared for. This was small enough to slip through my defenses. He wasn't going to change. He wasn't going to get better. So I closed my book. Alright, well, you do that. You are no longer a paladin as you just murdered someone. You'll have to atone for that before you can get your powers back. And I honestly don't know how to proceed because you're all now lost in the astral plane. And you can't stop a world-ending event. I need a few weeks to think about this. Turns out it took more than a few weeks to figure it out. About 2 years ago, we were playing Out of the Abyss when they made it to Graven Hollow. I Easter egged Marcus searching for tomes on the astral plane. So about 10 years for any movement on a resolution. Marcus still hadn't forgiven Zelda, so whatever had happened in the intervening years must have been bad. Eric and Rod were stoked when they recognized Marcus OOC and regaled the other players with tales of the Planeswalker campaign Ross had derailed. Max spewing Pepsi out his nose when being welcomed to the club. Marcus Vaughn's incredible wired clothes-hanging apparatus. Alex's unbelievable cooking skills. The weird, but good, but weird, experience that is best left behind undescribed. And Ross. That time Ross fucking killed an entire campaign. So yeah. But this was just the side campaign. I still had my main campaign. And if this is the only time you think Ross has ever single-handedly caused me to end an entire campaign by being stupid, well, I haven't done a very good job of explaining just who it is we're dealing with here. But I got you covered. I still got one more tale for you. Story number 7. That time a couple of PCs derailed a campaign. Or, how I learned to stop worrying and end a complete campaign setting. I don't even know where to start with this one. I guess I should be upfront about the amount of Ross in this story. Almost all of the stories I've told about that chibi chipmunk of a man have involved the campaign I'm about to talk about. As a result, most of the tasty bits have gone. This is more of a general story of how an okay-ish DM let a campaign get shit all over until it was just a big diarrhea Sunday. But that cherry on top, you better believe it, was Ross. This is the story of how a few terrible and destructive decisions, one simple player mistake, and Ross being about as smart as I hope you've come to expect, resulted in my giving up on my first homebrew campaign setting and closed the second chapter of my D&D career. I've sat up here on my high horse long enough, clucking my tongue and looking down my nose in judgmental distaste at the people who consider me friends for long enough. Something about getting off my high horse. These fucking analogies are killing me, man. I don't plan what I'm going to write out. I just start typing and eventually something kind of funny comes out, I hope. The point is, I'm not gonna sit here for 10 minutes thinking for the right turn of phrase just to take a shot at myself. Fair's fair, and my time has come, but I ain't putting any pepper on it. I was not the best DM. Most of us were in our 20s. I was reliable. I really think that was enough to delude those sorry fools into thinking I was better than I was. My campaign had all the tropes of terrible word building. Hodgepodge of cultures and geography that made no sense? Check. Lifting characters from comics and ideas from fantasy in their entirety and plopping them down into my setting? Check. A super evil continent of evil that is evil because... just because? Check. And other stuff. I did that thing where you over-prepare way too much bullshit your players don't give a fuck about, and then took them on a whirlwind tour of everything I created, only to be surprised when I couldn't keep any details straight. I wasn't perfect, is the point. It was fun. But a lot of heavy lifting was done by my players, and I just took credit for it. Just like the political party you don't like. I'm Canadian, but I don't care about your weird two-party system. Statistically speaking, to the US residents, of course, all you others get it. What's even with that two-party system, am I right? Weirdos. See, I just start typing. My brain and my fingers aren't exactly connected. I get distracted and off topic pretty quickly, sue me. Actually, really quickly, did you know that Canada has legislation protecting the right to apologize as a simple act of empathy and not an admission of guilt? Anyway, so that was a paragraph worth of nothing to say that a few of my players were tired and antsy. And one in particular, we'll call him Stan, was already a shit disturber. He had gotten it into his head that the head of a church, like the Pope we had, was actually evil. And so he decided to sneak into the Pope's chambers and confront him with his evilness. Now, the fact that the Pope actually was evil is besides the point. That the entire church was a scam, and that the big bad evil god who had died in legend had actually just been broken apart, with his actual godhood becoming a new, less powerful deity, has no bearing on my anger. I was pissed because there were no clues, no telegraphs, no nothing. This was a shit disturber disturbing shit for the fun of it. And he just so happened to do it in the worst possible way. The great, big, epic plot, I was also too ambitious for my own good back then, that would result in my players literally recreating the world, was in jeopardy. So when Stan went after the Pope, dragging another player's character along with him, drag is the wrong word, that guy's a little rascal on his own, we'll call him Turnip. They were approaching an extremely high-leveled villain head-on with his deepest secrets, while their allies slept unaware and vulnerable to retribution somewhere in the church. So I killed them. It is the only goddamn time in my life I have fucking murdered a PC without pause or regret. Idiots. But I didn't want to end the campaign there, so I had an ally sneak the rest of the party out of the church away from danger. I'm a big fan of things not happening in a vacuum. There are repercussions, ripples, and effects to the stuff my players do in the world. Some of it is good, some of it is bad. A powerful evil villain thinking the group is going to reveal his secrets. Bad. That's a bad one. Should have figured that out on your own. Not sure why I had to spell it out for you. I reasoned that they would need to lay low. But an adventure comprised of a group of super recognizable heroes playing rummy in a safe house for months didn't appeal to me. So I decided to actually send them underground for a while. And I gotta tell you, I was proud of what I came up with. I am proud of no other concept I came up with like I am with that adventure. The memory is bittersweet these days, considering how it all ended. We took a couple of weeks off so I could make an entirely new campaign. When we met up, their contact told them he had a job that would send them underground for a while, and that he had a map for them. I proceeded to hand them about 40 pages of loose-leaf paper filled with writing and apologized out of character, saying it was only about half done. My players were confused, so I explained. Centuries ago, a dwarven expedition set forth through the Underdark in search of a legendary material known as black water. The water is said to have had infinite untold power. 100 dwarfs set out. One returned with a vial. And that vial was secreted away by the dwarven clan. But in the years that followed, they accomplished some of the most legendary feats the world had seen. And it was on good authority that their engines of myth were powered by that single vial. If they can make their own way to the source, a mystical pump that will flow a regular supply back to the surface could be set up. And in the time they were gone, their contact would use his substantial resources to settle things down for a safe return. The water was a MacGuffin. The real point was the adventure and the map I gave them. It was a journal written from an apprentice scribe of the dwarven expedition, detailing their journey. It was written entirely in character, with all the knowledge of the journeyman. I described threats and challenges, but sometimes only vaguely and sometimes incorrectly. It even used certain dwarven words untranslated as there was no English equivalent, forcing my players to suss out their meaning from context. I thought it was a brilliant opportunity to fester some dread in the party and have some fun with format. They were, of course, free to try a different path, but they might not get there. Or they might encounter something worse than what the journal had described. It had a few contingency plans in place if they did, but the journal was a guaranteed path. Over the course of the adventure, I had added about another 20 pages and still had 20-ish to go. I would have detailed the whole doomed affair. It was a lot of fun to make. But there was a wrinkle. The contact sent them to meet an associate of his who had the pump, an NPC named Wong. When they met Wong halfway en route to the Delph side, they discovered he was a great big bald warrior. Wong was actually evil. Actually, Wong was actually dead. This was Grigory, a character one of the party had actually met before. But that character had retired to deal with the god of the undead hating his fucking guts. Seriously, don't play with the deck of many things. And the player didn't recognize the description. He was planning on killing the party in revenge for their slights to his brothers, who they had also previously met and kinda killed on one occasion. So this is gonna be fun. Miters and aboleths and Tao and rolling balls of fungi that melted your insides with a sudden betrayal thrown into the mix. We're all set for the next dozen or so sessions. The party consisted of a glorious cleric and also the old stalwart bard who lasted from session 1, both played by Eric, a badass bitch of a cleric played by Rod, a dwarven Natash played by Brandon, and a druid played by Ross. I think there was someone else, I don't know. A lot from that campaign has overshadowed my memory in the intervening years. I'd like to pause right here for one moment and describe me as a DM for a second. I grew up when D&D was hard. Like gay porn hard. Experience was hard fought for, levels were magnificent achievements unto themselves, challenges were frequent and rough. And treasure was random. You rolled. That will become depressingly relevant in a moment. So they're following the map. It first describes how the Dwarven expedition spent a month building an elevator down a 500-foot underground cliff. And during that time, something was moving through the stone and snatching dwarves. So they fuck right past the miter before it can really mess with them. And the elevator is rotted away. I'm not gonna get into every little thing, I just want to express that there were some challenges. Luckily, I had a few good players, not Ross, who were quite adept at some creative thinking, believe me. Seriously, you gotta believe. Anywho, they randomly roll for treasure after one encounter results in them finding the monstrous horde. One of the rolls is for some drums. Who here has actually encountered a cursed item of any substance? Like, something that will really fuck up a game. Hopefully not many. A cursed item here or there is a funny enough thing, but a DM should fucking know better than to introduce something that can really gum up the works. Seriously, don't play around with a deck of many things. The group could identify magic items. They weren't high enough level to remove curses. They all agreed to wait until they had refreshed their spells to identify everything. Then watch came, and Brandon decides he can't wait. On his watch, he decides to play with bongos. Well, they looked like bongos. They were drums. Of deafening. I ask him how he plays with them, because I'm a big DM wearing his big boy pants and I make the decisions no matter how terrible. You play with a cursed item, you're gonna get the curse. Literally, no common sense is what I'm getting at. Brandon drums his palms on his knees, doing a little beat. Ba-ba-da-boom-boom, hitting each palm in turn against the respective knee in succession, back and forth. And I started to relax, until he finishes off with hitting both palms down against both knees simultaneously, thereby officially activating the curse. Everyone within a certain radius is immediately made deaf. Permanently. Restoration is needed, which they can't cast. Fuck me, what fun. Brandon's dwarf realizes he can't hear anymore, puts the drums back, and promptly goes to sleep in order to act just as fucking confused as all the other characters in the morning. Asshole after my own heart, that one. Okay, so the party is permanently deaf, in the Underdark, only a quarter of the way through, with no way back the way they came. Because they can't swim up a rushing waterfall. One of Roz's few good plays was saving everyone from drowning by parting the water so they could climb out. I can work with this. But you know what? Wong, he needs to go. I can't have my players get betrayed now. There's something going around and no one has any penicillin. They got enough to deal with right now. They don't need a backstabbing by a demigod. Oh, he was a demigod, kind of. That is good information to have. So, one night while the party is camped by a river, I have Gruongi start just fucking cursing them out. They can't hear him, and he hates them, so he takes the opportunity to just lay it onto them and say how much he's going to murder them. It's a lot. He's planning on doing a lot of murder to them. They're deaf, I hear you exclaim. How does him threatening to kill them reveal anything? Well, if you'd settle down, I'll tell you. Someone could lip read? No, but seriously, stop interrupting and I'll tell you. We could sit here all day and keep guessing, or, I could get on with it. I've been writing this crap for a week. It's time to head home with this shit. So zip it for 2 more seconds, and I'll tell you. Ross. Ross could technically hear. As a druid, he had a familiar. Unlike in 5th or maybe other editions, I don't know much about 3rd or 4th, those kind of passed me by. Familiars were actual animals summoned from the wilderness and not some spiritual what's-it given physical form. Ross had summoned a familiar in the Underdark and gotten a badge. And through the familiar, he could experience its senses. And thankfully, Ross had made a point of saying he was sending his bat off to go hunt that night, and so it was out of range of the dwarves. If he hadn't, he'd be permanently stuck with a deaf bat as his familiar, with no way to replace it. Thank fuck he sent it away, or he'd be as deaf as a bat. So it all comes down to Ross. Never has a more disappointing sentence been written by my hand. Ross, through his bat, hears the muttering. He can't quite make out the voice as it's slow and the river is loud, but he distinctly hears threats to murder each and every member of the party. Well, everyone except Wongori. I figure that's enough to put 1 + 1 together. That's right, I'd learned nothing. That was about to change with a few simple words to be spoken in a few moments. Ross wakes everyone up to warn them what he's heard. Okay, this is it. They're going to discover rpghorrorstories is evil, big fight, huzzas, and back to our regularly scheduled nightmare. Then Ross, ever so delicately, placed the cherry atop the whole mess.
The river's evil. The river is evil. I heard it muttering that it wanted to kill us.
Fucking excuse me? The river is evil. I know what I did was dumb and rough. I thought I could spin it into something fun. And that was what he had come up with? Everyone else around the table had figured it out already, but Ross was the only one who could hear. Everyone was relying on him as their ears. Oh god, everyone was relying on him. The completion of this campaign relied on Ross. You know that shot in horror movies where they dolly in while also zooming out to really fuck with the perspective? I felt that then. The river was evil. I immediately lost all my confidence in my ability to run that campaign. I was done. Fucked had been too shit at that point, and I needed to do the mercy of putting a bullet behind the ear of my campaign, because no one else was going to do it. A few days later, I let everyone know that I didn't think the campaign would continue. There were some token half-hearted reassurances of, "Nah, Doc, it's still good and stuff," but in truth, we all saw the writing on the wall. It's hard to miss, spelled 100 times over in letters 50 feet tall. People called nerds, they go the house. Wait, my Latin is a little off. I mean to say, the game was over. Listen, I don't know what you wanted from me. If you expected me to go out on Ross with a bang, you've never heard him whimper. Not every RPG horror story needs to be about one person being indignant or incredulous at other people's fuckery. Every time you point a finger, there is 3 others pointing right back at you. We should all learn to look inwards and finger ourselves once in a while. Let he who is without idiocy cast the first firebolt and all that. No, this was my horror story. Ross just had a walk-on part in the background. Sure, he pooped his pants and ran off screen, but it was all in the background on another TV show. I was the bad actor casually chewing the scenery front and center. I probably got a few more horror stories in me, but they don't feature Ross, and I'm gonna take a break. Maybe check out Ross's Facebook page, see what he's getting up to. We're still friends on Facebook. I don't want to talk about it, I know I'm sick. So, that's it. Hope whatever all this turned out to be met your expectations. If it didn't, well, I'm sorry. And that is a simple expression of empathy, not an admission of guilt. Stay in school. Okay, so, many people have commented on this story what I think as well. While Ross is a problematic player in his own right, the author comes off as extremely bitter and a bully towards Ross. They come off as extremely condescending throughout the whole story, and it really makes me sympathize more with Ross than them. Well, Ross, if we are to trust the author's words, had his problems. Well, the author hasn't exactly helped the situations, to say the least. The more I read through this, the more they seemed like the true villain of the story. What a twist indeed. That was it for today's story. I hope you enjoyed your stay and that I will see you again soon, for there are always more stories to be shared. Hello, Editing Co here. I actually forgot to mention something. I've opened up a Patreon. Hey! So, if you want to support me and can comfortably part with some money, it'd be greatly appreciated. Obviously, do not feel obligated to. There's also, no tiers or benefits on there because I don't want to hide things behind a paywall. So, see it as more of a tip jar or donations, really. That be it. I hope you enjoyed the story and that I will see you again next time. Bye bye!